impact on the forest, because as I said, in the case of Africa, when you have conflict, when you have certain political regimes being loosened up, you have severe natural decimation. Same thing happened here, and people just went out, started killing animals and consuming them, poaching them, and what resulted were two large mammals completely disappeared from this: the Indian one-horned rhinoceros and the eastern swan deer. And several other species were decimated, but they still somehow managed to survive. But it was in a very, very sorry state, and it was so bad that UNESCO actually put it in the danger list. They said this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site at risk. But sort of the sunlight came through when the Bodoland Accord was signed in 2003. The Bodoland Accord is essentially nothing, it's an accord of peace. And that is exactly when we started off working in this. Although we had been following the events before that. So in 2003, once the Bodoland Accord was signed, Wildlife Trust of India, what we first started doing is started mapping the entire area, mapping the vision of Greater Manas. So we kept Manas National Park and we moved on to the reserve forest patches, looked at the entire 1,200 square kilometer landscape, and we looked at priority areas within that. As a result, you see the disparity from 2003 to 2011. This is an effect that sort of started, that sort of culminated after years of work from 2003. And you can see it's just 350 hectares of vital habitats that have actually been reclaimed. And the only reason we've been able to reclaim is that because through an integrated approach with local people, which I will come to in greater detail later on, people said, okay, fine, the 350 hectare we don't need. Take it. Put it back into Manas. And patch restorations are going on. These are several priority patches that we've identified where we are doing restoration work, not directly but through the communities. The Recipe Rehabilitation Initiative also started off in 2003, which essentially put back 7 rhinos, 10 elephants, 7 black bears, 4 clouded leopards, and 1 tiger. Now these numbers may seem very small, but what one needs to understand is, one, all of this has cascading effects which are very difficult to measure. One measure that we got recently was 3 of the 7 rhinos in 2011 gave birth to babies. And we have been monitoring them since 2003. And that was a sign of success for us, because now the 7 went up to 9. And with proper care, and those calves survived, and luckily they're surviving with them now, they're going to reproduce their own again. Among the elephants, 2 of the elephants actually went out and moved into, they actually got assimilated into a natural herd. That was a sign of success. The tiger, we saw it, first after 3 years, and then again recently we camera trapped the tiger, and it's been surviving. So it's probably also reproduced. It was a male. So this is also probably reproduced every year. So that was a sign of success. The clouded leopards we lost after a couple of years. You would have, some of you might have seen the national documentary. We lost it after a couple of years. But what is interesting is the Bhutan Forest Department. They saw one of the clouded leopards and they reported back to us saying that we've seen your clouded leopard. So that was a sign of success. So we thought we had lost it, we just rehabilitated it and poof. But then this resurfaced. So that was a sign of success for us. We also looked at human-wildlife conflict mitigation, but especially pertaining to elephants in Manas, as well as other animals. But in terms of other animals, what we did was we established the Kokrasar Wildlife Home, which is not a rescue center, but it has the basic infrastructure to attend to conflict animals. We also placed a rescue NPS team, so you can see part of the rescue center is visible in the right hand corner. This is our resident doctor, Dr. Panji, and we have the NPS team. And in terms of elephants specifically, we started putting up electric fences, which again the people requested, and we only provided the technical expertise and the material, and they put it up themselves. So it's around 18 kilometers of fencing. And one very important thing that we started in Manas was the system of ex gratia, where people lost their lives or property. We paid them. We got in a compensation scheme through the government where we paid them. So initially the 4 ex gratias, what happened was we were paying them out of our own funding. But now the government has sort of agreed to take that on themselves. The legal and policy wing held finally in 2010, where the Bodoland Territorial Council said that okay, we declare Greater Manas as an official protected area. So now the policy wing is essentially trying to move it through MOU and get the entire patch declared as a protected area by the Government of India. But this was much more important than getting Government of India to declare it, because this is a conflict-prone area ruled by the Bodos. And Bodos saying that this is a protected area is much more than the Government of India really saying that okay, we protect this area. Yeah? Okay. And this was another big victory that we had, is finally after this many years of effort and putting back animals and working with the communities, UNESCO said, fine, now this is out of the database. And if you go to the UNESCO World Heritage site website, you will see very few sites having actually ever been removed from the database. This is a very rare occurrence. In terms of mass awareness, the skill set, we've got 2 small campaigns. We haven't yet done a large campaign, full-fledged campaign as we call it. We had a full-fledged campaign, Manas Pride, but then again it sort of got subsumed in among the 2 small campaigns. The animal action education was something that we've been doing for a long time, and this was actually done full as term in Manas, where 1200 students above were actually addressed. So through the animal action education awareness activities, what we do is we train teachers, not just students, and we tell the teachers to train the students, and we monitor it over the first several years. And we also do some activities like the wall painting competition, which you will see on the right, which essentially a lot of children from different schools come together and they just paint. That's all they do. It's just a feel-good factor, and it's sort of a bonding with nature experience kind of thing. And we over 40 villages we've targeted for mass awareness in 2008. But again, this was not actually a mass awareness, because the full-fledged campaign, Manas Pride campaign that we call, we have a different format that we consider as a mass campaign, which is actually very reminiscent of the Gujarat campaign that we did, where we actually moved through districts, with a large setup, these huge parades and all that, which we have not done in Manas. But the efforts were sort of disjunct, but they were, it was well spread out across the Greater Manas area. In terms of community work, in 2010 we started the Green Livelihoods, and we realized that first thing that we need to do is reduce dependence. One of the biggest dependencies that local people have is in terms of firewood. So what we did was we introduced fuel efficient cook stoves in Manas. Around 182 cook stoves were provided. And again, the cook stoves are built by the community. All that we provide is some bit of the material and the expertise to build it. Because we recognize that we build it and give it to them, they won't be able to maintain it. So they need to be able to maintain it and spread it further. We started weaving training and support for 35 women. We provided 70 handlooms and one weaving center, where they all get together and essentially they weave. We provided some support, very minuscule, for horticulture. We provided one horticulture shed, cash crop plantation, mustard, ginger, chili, turmeric. Now all of these are very, very minuscule efforts. Now I'll tell you why these minuscule efforts made an effect in the subsequent slides. We also gave small businesses, tailoring, grocery shops, to 4 families. But this is where actually it came into effect. We constituted 8 community-based organizations in Manas, and this was again possible because of certain youth who came across and said, we want to do the kind of work you're doing. Because you're coming from outside and doing the work we should be doing. So why don't we do the work? You train us. So we then left all of this and we started focusing on just the 8 CPOs. And we started giving them training, equipping them. So now these 8 CPOs not only further these initiatives that we started, so they've started giving alternative livelihoods to other families that sort of opt for them, but they also patrol. CPOs also patrol the different patches of forest in Greater Manas National Park along with the forest department. In 2006, we started supporting the frontline staff, and we started with training the 50 staff, 54 staff, and we also provided training to CBOs. We also provide equipment, as you can see here. So those are for the CBOs. We've given cycles, flashlights, and for VR, because it's the One Rakshak project, we provide patrolling equipment which consists of a bag, water canister, flashlight, boots, jackets. And sorry, let's go back. From 2007 to 2013, in the HC2 there are over 450